What university do we need in the future? I think we need a university that meets two criteria. One is relevant for the future, relevant, which I would translate as relevant for the massive transformation that we are in the midst of. Transformation of our economy, transformation of our democracy, transformation of our learning systems. So that's one, being relevant for what society and the planet, the healing of the planet and the transformation of society is calling us to do. And the other one, the other criteria I would say is be relevant the deeper questions that young people really bring. Be relevant the deeper questions, kind of, and maybe you could say developmental needs of our time, particularly of our young people. I mean, it's not only young people going to universities, we know that. So it's in a way everyone really. And many of these needs and many of these questions have very little to do with more intellectual knowledge, but has more to do with developmental challenges that we face in our lives, in our biographies, in our relationships, in our leadership challenges that we face in our professional work. So that's those are the two things I would say. So that's the university we need, and in a way, probably there is. I mean, most people would probably agree on that. That's probably not a very very far out statement what I just said. But what's more challenging is the how really to move from talking about these things to actually embodying this, right, in everything we do, embodying that in our classrooms, embodying that in how we open up our institutions of higher ed, embodying it even on a whole systems level, right, how really the university system, the higher ed system is relating to society, right? And if we look at the evolution of the idea of the university from the unity of research and teaching, the classical university, and then to maybe the 20th century version of research, teaching and application, right? And kind of the movement into mass universities, democratizing the access to education, which is a great progress, but sometimes comes at the expense of maybe a deeper learning process that is necessary now. When you look at these questions from a 21st century perspective, I mean, so if we think a few years back, right, so everyone and their brother or sister did this 2020 this, 2020 that, right, university 2020, and we had it across all the, so we had all these scenarios for the future in the maybe 5 years ago that had the title 2020, right? So, but then let's look at these projections, right? So how many of us actually predicted what did happen in 2020, right? So much for all these projections that where you just take a trend of the past and you extend it into the future. And where does that get us? Nowhere, right? That's not what the real future is. The future in 2020. So 2020 is really a teacher for us, I think. Also in terms of what a new university should be looking like. And the first lesson is So whatever the future is, usually it's not an extension of the past, right? Maybe in the past, sometimes that was the case, right? But I think most people would agree that we have been really entering a different period, a period that's shaped by disruption. We have had multiple disruptions in 2020, and the one thing maybe almost everyone would agree on, I believe, I'm not sure really everyone, but many people would agree on, is so it's not over now, right? So the profound disruption, so we have been entering a different stage of a different stage of development, maybe in different historical era, in which is very much shaped by disruption, right? So we had COVID in March, and then all the waves that came after. We had Black Lives Matter. So COVID, so when you think about COVID as a teacher, what was, I am like teaching systems thinking, but who is the most significant teacher of systems thinking on this planet right now? It has been the pandemic, right? Because it's making us aware of all these levels of interdependencies. Then Black Lives Matter really was an intervention that not only opened up our awareness on this level of connection, how we, right, as a whole system, interconnect with each other across the planet. And but the Black Lives Matter intervention really was becoming more aware of this level of connection, that there has been, particularly here from an American perspective, a continuity of structural violence against minorities and against people of color and against African Americans. That's just unbearable, and that for too long time was blocked out of the awareness and of the experience of most other people like myself who are not experiencing this kind of direct and structural violence. And so like 1989 was a collapse of a wall in Berlin, and which is a wall that separates two systems, right? The 2020 experience, which really has brought us into the 21st century. The 21st century is just beginning now, really, has been opening up with the collapse of another wall. It's not a wall between system A and system B, but it's a wall between the system and myself. And what we are experiencing now is becoming more aware of how I connect and interconnect, not only with others, but also with the whole system around us. And how my way of paying attention, the quality of my listening, the quality of my paying attention is actually co-shaping of what's happening around me. So the first level of that experience was really the COVID. The second one, Black Lives Matter, really kind of on the heart dimension, right? Experiencing the collapse of a wall that separated my felt experience from that of others in my community, kind of that are on the receiving end of that structural violence. And maybe what we saw a few days ago with the Capitol, kind of the attempted coup of the Capitol, maybe that's kind of the beginning of, and we had a precursor of that in Germany, a few months back. So it's not just kind of these crazy Americans, it's a global phenomenon. And so what is that? That's really where this form of violence is turning against itself, against its own source. It's turning against the foundations of our very constitutions based on which we operate as a collective. So it's not others. It's going, the violence is turning, it's a reflexive turn. It's turning against our own foundations. So that's really, when you really read what has been happening in the first year of this so if 2020 was the real entering finally into the 21st century, what was in the first year? 3 interventions that teach us about our interconnectedness, kind of on the level of the mind, on the level of the heart, and on the level of our own collective doing. And so what should a new university be? A new university should be a place where you can read that language, where you can, because when you now double click and say, okay, but everyone is like there, when you talk personally with anyone, including the people who stormed the Capitol, they're like reasonable people, right? So it's like they're good neighbors, right? They would help you out, but there's something broken, obviously, right? And what is it, right? So when you really read so now at the tail end of the Trump period, so we can maybe see the pattern language more clearly. What really is it? So, and it's really being divorced from reality, right? So that's like denial, right? So that's one of the and Trump is just a symptom, right? That started before him, by the way. So, but that's kind of one of the deeper patterns here. So that I'm projecting just my own fantasies out into the world, and it goes counter the essence of science. What is the essence of science? And that's why we have a university, to learn about that. The essence of science is listening. Let the data talk to you. That's the essence of science. You're not projecting just your wishful thinking out. And you're not just in denial of what's happening. So the science is a disciplined process of letting the data talk to you. Now, what I do with Theory U is, and what I would propose for the university of the future is, we live in a world where just letting the exterior data talk to us, that's a good beginning, but it's not good enough. In reality, to deal with any of the issues, right, the ecological challenges, the challenges of inequality, but also the social and mental health issues that are rampant really right now, to deal with any of those, we actually need to hone and develop deeper learning capacities at scale in our societies right now. And universities, I mean, why do we have universities? To build these capacities, right? So that's really, that's the only really, we have universities to build these capacities that are relevant to deal with the challenges of our time. So let me just kind of name 3 of these deeper capacities, which I think could be, no, I don't want to say easily implemented, but if they would be the core curriculum, right? They are usually the 3 things I'm just going to mention now are sometimes a little bit happens more or less accidental, right? Based on the initiatives of few colleagues maybe, or a few people, but they should be much more in the center really of the new curriculum. And the first one has really to do with deep listening. The capacity to deep listening, the capacity of paying attention to your attention, which is another word for, which is, one way you could define what mindfulness really is. So that's really at the core. In a 21st century where the whole economy is really an attention-based economy, and where leadership really in that context starts with paying attention to your attention. So that's like a personal capacity, but also something we need to bring into our conversations when we shift from debate to dialogue and so forth. So the capacity for deep listening and letting the data talk to you. And with the data, I don't mean just kind of technical instruments talking to you, but really I'm referring to really the experience we have and kind of all the senses we have as human beings, kind of, and making them more, become a black belt in listening, become a black belt in terms of how we pay attention is really at the foundation of any kind of mastery in any kind of discipline. Number two, spaces, collective spaces where we can move into the resonance with reality. Because what we see, the Trumpism phenomenon, is denial and being divorced from reality, right? Denial is not a strategy, not towards COVID, not towards climate, not towards election results, right? Yet, that's exactly the phenomenon that we see. Addressing that at the root is really because it's not just Mr. Trump, right? So it's like in all our multi-stakeholder issues we have in modern society, we often remain in our own echo chambers. So what we need to do is we need to build these spaces for co-sensing where we feel the resonance. What do I mean with resonance? Where I can feel how the most marginalized stakeholder in my system is experiencing this situation, right? So where I can tap into my own compassion and empathy. So that's so when I talk about empathy and compassion, I'm not talking at it as a moral philosopher or something, right? I'm talking about it as an economist, because that's what you need in order to move the whole damn system forward, right? In order to come up with the systems innovation that are so necessary today. So this capacity, if you look at really the digital environments, like with social media, like Facebook and so forth, what are they built on? What is the whole big data economy built on? Basically on architectures of separation, right? So we get stuck in our own echo chambers. A lot of the amplification, as we all know, in these big data economies is about maximizing user behavior, which you do by amplifying anger, hate, and fear, right? And that's exactly what's working, both as a business strategy for big data companies, the trillion-dollar companies, and it's also working as a political strategy. Not forever, as we can see here in the most recent election results, which were very, very close. So in a way, it's still working, right? So if you want to address that, the architectures of separation, the polarization in society, at the root, you need to build the capacity to build holding spaces where we can bring in together very different groups, very different stakeholders, and where I can feel the resonance, right? I'm not divorcing myself to reality, but I feel the resonance in the context of very complex multi-stakeholder groups, which is exactly what happens today in the world, and which is not prepared at all or what needs to happen in the world, but it's a capacity for holding deep spaces for dialogue and to really dealing with differences, because the problems we have in society is not to organize to move from one ideology to the next one. That's not going to solve anything. What we need to do is to bring around shared issues, stakeholders together that come from very different contexts with very different ideologies, and then have a conversation. That's what we need. And that's where dialogue matters. And that's what we need to begin to build the foundations for in universities, of course. And then the third, I think at the core, right, on the third level, when you now move into, okay, so what is, I think at the core, a university has to do something very simple, which is build action confidence. And what I mean with action confidence is not doing something very well. What I mean with action confidence is sensing and actualizing your highest future possibility. Sensing a potential that no one has maybe felt before, a potential not like for the world in general, a potential that depends on you for it to come into reality. And then have the courage to put your foot into the territory of the unknown, right? To step forward into a territory no one ever has stepped forward into. That's really, so what is the 21st century experience? Disruption, right? Old systems are breaking down. And it's not just driven by technology, it's kind of through all the environmental issues, kind of the climate disruptions that are already coming, mass migration, and all the other, you just need to read the newspaper and you know what's coming. So it's too late to stop these things. We need to do our thing to reduce it, but it's too late to stop it. Where's the leverage? The leverage is how we respond. That's the new role of the university, right? How we respond to that. And am I responding from a level where I'm just reactive against something that I want to prevent? Or can I activate my action confidence? Can I connect with the highest future possibility that I feel I can be instrumental for bringing it into the world? And can I embody that and act from that in the now? So that's really what I mean with presencing, right? The capacity to step into the future. A future that's very different from the past. And it's a future that I feel I as an entrepreneur, I as an artist, and I maybe as a scientist have an intimate relationship to. But it's not there yet. But through my own journey, I can move it into reality. So action confidence in an environment where where people are reactive, are frustrated, and are depressed about what's happening. That's what we need in this century. Because whenever a lot of disruption happens, that's exactly the moment where we can create profound innovations, not only on small levels, but also on the level of the whole system. And that's, I think, the role of universities, to capacitating, to creating the foundations and creating the holding spaces where these types of capacities can be practiced and cultivated and supported.